My sister was being crowned the family princess. 300 people were clapping. My mother was crying into a napkin. My father was on stage, arm around my sister, looking like a king who had just solved world hunger. I was at table 31, behind a pillar, next to the kitchen door. My place card said Lydia. They spelled my name wrong. Then a lawyer walked up to me. I had never seen him before. He didn't clap. He didn't smile. He just placed an envelope next to my untouched salad. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this," he said. "She said to give it to you the moment your father erased you in public." I stared at the envelope. Red wax seal. My grandmother's initials. My full name typed perfectly across the front. Across the room, my father raised his glass. "Vivian has always represented the best of this family." More clapping. Still nobody looked at me. The lawyer leaned closer. "She also told me to say one more thing," she said. "Lydia has spent her whole life being told she's slow. Now let them see how fast the truth can move." For the first time all night I stopped shaking. My name is Lydia. I'm 29 years old. My family thinks I'm the slow one. They are about to find out how wrong they are. My name is Lydia Mercer. I am 29 years old, and for most of my life my family treated my dyslexia like a moral failure, not a learning difference, not a challenge, a stain. My father, Conrad Mercer, ran Mercer Lane Holdings, a commercial development company in Boston that my grandmother had built from one rented desk and a rotary phone in 1971. By the time I was old enough to understand money, Mercer Lane owned office towers, medical complexes, apartment blocks, and half a dozen historic buildings my father liked to describe as the family's footprint. He said the family's footprint as if he had poured the concrete himself. He had not. My grandmother, Beatrice Lane Mercer, had started the company when banks still laughed at women who asked for business loans without a husband beside them. She bought neglected buildings, restored them, leased them to small companies, and reinvested every dollar. She knew boiler rooms, zoning boards, tenant disputes, foundation cracks, elevator contracts, and the difference between a property that looked expensive and a property that could survive a bad decade. My father inherited the title. Grandmother built the thing. In our house, that distinction was never discussed. Vivian was my older sister by 18 months. She was polished from birth. Straight hair that obeyed brushes, handwriting like calligraphy, test scores that made adults lower their voices in admiration. She learned violin, Mandarin, debate, tennis, and the kind of table manners that made donors smile at charity dinners. I mixed up letters. I lost my place on pages. I needed audiobooks, colored tabs, diagrams, and twice as much time. When I was 7, a specialist told my parents I had dyslexia and would do well with structured support. My mother cried in the parking lot afterward. Not because she was worried about me, because, as she told my father while I sat in the back seat pretending not to hear, people will talk. After that, everything became a comparison. Vivian had enrichment. I had patience, spoken in the tone people use for bad weather. Vivian had Yale tutors when she was 14 because my parents were already planning her future. I was told flashcards should be enough. Vivian had private debate coaching, summer programs, museum internships arranged by family friends, and a college counselor who charged more per hour than my first apartment cost per week. I had my mother sitting across from me at the dining room table, sighing while I tried to read aloud. "Lydia," she would say, pressing her fingers to her temple, "you make everything harder than it needs to be." My father was worse because he tried to make cruelty sound practical. "Your sister is academic," he said once when I was 12. "You are more hands-on. There is no shame in knowing your lane." Knowing your lane. That phrase followed me through childhood like a leash. Grandmother Beatrice was the only person who never said it. Every Saturday, I took the Green Line to her apartment near the public garden. She lived in a brick building with old brass mailboxes and an elevator that shuddered between floors. Her living room smelled like black tea, paper, and the lemon oil she used on antique furniture. The walls were covered with photographs of buildings before and after she had saved them. She did not make me read to prove I could. She taught me how to look. She spread old site plans across her dining table and used colored pencils to show me cash flow, ownership structures, renovation timelines, and risk. She turned contracts into maps. She made me trace who owed what to whom. She asked what was missing, not what the words said first. "Your brain comes in through the side door," she told me once, tapping a lease agreement with one red fingernail. Most people march through the front and miss half the rooms. Dad says I'm slow, her face hardened. Your father mistakes speed for intelligence. That has cost him more money than he knows. I laughed because I thought she was comforting me. Years later, I realized she had been warning me. The first public humiliation I remember clearly happened at Thanksgiving when I was 16. 30 relatives sat around my parents' long dining table in Cambridge. Silver candlesticks, rented chairs, flower arrangements too tall for conversation. My father stood for the annual toast. He praised Vivienne for winning a national debate tournament. He praised my cousin Everett for getting into Dartmouth. He praised a family friend for selling a company. Then my aunt called from the far end of the table. "And what is Lydia up to these days?" My father smiled with his mouth, not his eyes. "Lydia is teaching us all the virtue of patience." Laughter moved around the table. Not loud, not everyone, just enough. Vivienne looked down at her plate and smiled. My mother murmured, "Conrad," but there was no warning in it, only performance. I stared at the cranberry sauce while heat climbed my neck. Under the table, Grandmother Beatrice found my hand and squeezed so hard it almost hurt. When I looked up, she was not looking at me. She was looking at my father with the coldest expression I had ever seen on her face. 3 months later, she called me to her apartment. She was 81 then, still sharp, still elegant, but thinner than before. Her silver hair was pinned at the back of her head, and the blue veins in her hands showed through her skin. On the coffee table sat a dark walnut box with a brass clasp. "I want you to keep this," she said. "What is it?" "Something for when you need proof." "Proof of what?" "That you were never what they said you were." I tried to open it. She put her hand over mine. "Not yet." "Grandma. When your father shows the room exactly who he is, open it." I wanted to argue. I wanted a clearer answer. But she had already turned toward the window, looking down at the winter trees along the common. "He thinks inheritance is the same thing as ownership," she said. "That is a dangerous mistake." 18 months later, she died of pancreatic cancer. I was the only grandchild at her bedside when her breathing changed. Vivienne was at a legal fellowship in Washington and sent flowers. My parents came for 20 minutes, spoke to the hospice nurse about arrangements, and left because my father had a meeting with investors. Grandmother opened her eyes once near the end. "Side door," she whispered. I bent closer. "What?" "Use it." Then she was gone. The walnut box went into the back of my closet, wrapped in a sweater. I did not open it. Some promises are easier to keep when you are afraid of what they might ask from you. After college, I applied to Mercer Lane Holdings. Not because I wanted to be near my father. I wanted to be near the buildings. I wanted to prove that grandmother had been right, that my way of seeing had value. I had graduated from a public university with a degree in urban planning. It was not Yale. It did not impress my parents. But I had worked twice as hard for it as anyone at the graduation ceremony knew. My father hired me as a records coordinator, salary $45,000 a year. "A foot in the door," my mother said, as if the door did not belong to my own family. Vivienne joined the company 3 months later as senior counsel after finishing Yale Law and a federal clerkship. Her starting package was $300,000 plus bonus and relocation reimbursement, even though she moved from New Haven to Boston, a distance my father treated like an international transfer. My office was not an office. It was a desk beside the file room and a copier that jammed whenever the weather changed. I scanned leases. I scheduled conference rooms. I organized old permits no one wanted to touch. I brought coffee to men who had known me since childhood and still called me Lisa, Laura, or Conrad's younger one. But the file room had secrets. Old companies leave paper trails. Even careful people forget what they once printed, signed, initialed, revised, and abandoned. I read slowly, yes. But documents do not care how long you take if you are willing to stay late. I learned Mercer Lane from the inside out. Not the glossy investor deck version, the real version. I saw which buildings paid for the others. I saw which tenants were always late and which managers covered it. I saw renewal patterns. I saw my father's habit of pushing risk into side entities with names similar enough to confuse anyone skimming. I saw how often Vivienne gave legal advice that sounded brilliant in meetings, but ignored how buildings actually operated. At lunch, I drew diagrams in a notebook, arrows, boxes, timelines. Names circled in blue when they mattered more than they appeared to. One afternoon, Patricia Sloan, an executive assistant who had worked for my grandmother since the 80s, paused beside my desk and looked down at a flowchart I had made of a refinancing structure. "Who taught you to see like that?" she asked. "My grandmother." Patricia's expression softened. "Of course she did." 2 years passed that way. I remained invisible, which made listening easy. Then came the email. It arrived on a Monday in April while rain streaked the windows of the file room. Subject: Confidential Organizational Adjustment. Dear Ms. Mercer, following a strategic review of administrative operations, your current role will be eliminated effective June 30th. Human Resources will contact you regarding severance and transition support. I read it 4 times. My rent in Somerville was already more than I could afford without 2 roommates. My savings would last maybe 8 weeks. The words on the screen blurred, settled, blurred again. Then I heard my father's voice through the cracked door of the small conference room nearby. "She cannot still be here when Vivian steps into leadership," my mother answered, softer. "Conrad, she will be hurt. She is always hurt. That cannot govern corporate structure. She's your daughter. And Vivian is the future of this company. I will not have investors asking why the future CEO's sister is filing permits in the basement." Basement. I was on the 26th floor, but that was how he saw me, my mother sighed. "Maybe it is kinder. She can find work better suited to her pace." Better suited to her pace. I sat frozen with my hand on the mouse. My father continued. "The celebration is Friday. I will make the announcement there. Once the succession is public, the rest becomes easier." The celebration. Vivian's Yale Law reception was 3 nights away at the Fairmont Copley Plaza. My parents had rented the grand ballroom and invited everyone who mattered in their world. Investors, partners, charity board members, relatives, judges, architects, and the kind of people who used summer as a verb. I had not wanted to go. Now, I understood I was supposed to attend my own erasure. On Friday, I wore a navy dress from a consignment shop and shoes I had repaired with glue the night before. My mother intercepted me in the lobby before I reached the ballroom. Her eyes moved over me in a slow, disappointed inventory. "Lydia," she said, "you knew this was formal. This is formal. For some events, effort matters." I looked at her silk gown, her pearls, the diamond bracelet my father had bought after a profitable zoning appeal. "I'll remember that." She leaned closer, perfume and warning. "Tonight is important for your sister. Whatever feelings you have about your position, your life, or the company, do not make them everyone else's problem. My position is being eliminated." Her face tightened. "This is exactly what I mean. Did you know? This is not the place." The answer was yes. She pointed me toward table 31 near the service doors, behind a column thick enough to hide half the stage. My place card had my name misspelled as Lydia. I sat down and turned the card face down. At 8:15, the lights dimmed. My father took the stage beneath a ceiling of chandeliers and painted clouds. Behind him hung a huge photo of Vivian in her Yale regalia, chin lifted, smile controlled. "Friends, family, colleagues," he began. "Tonight we celebrate a woman of rare brilliance." Applause. Vivian stood beside him in a green dress that probably cost 2 months of my rent. My mother watched from the front table, one hand pressed to her heart. My father listed Vivian's achievements: Yale Law, Law Review, Clerkship, Corporate Fellowship, Partnership Track. Each sentence landed like a brick in the wall between us. Then his voice deepened. "Tonight, I am also pleased to share what many of you have long expected. Upon my retirement, Vivian Mercer will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer of Mercer Lane Holdings." The room erupted. Vivian covered her mouth as if surprised, though her dress had been chosen for this photograph months ago. My father raised his hand for quiet. "In addition, my estate plan will leave Vivian our Beacon Hill residence, the family art collection, and my full voting interest in Mercer Lane. She has earned the responsibility of carrying our name forward." Responsibility, name, forward. The words moved past my table without touching me, which was the point. A cousin beside me leaned over and whispered, "So do you get anything?" I looked at the stage where my father hugged my sister, apparently a good seat by the kitchen. That was when the man in the gray suit approached. He had white hair, a narrow face, and the careful posture of someone who never entered a room without knowing where the exits were. He set a business card beside my plate. "Samuel Greer, Whitcomb and Greer, attorneys at law." "Ms. Mercer," he said. "Yes?" "I represented your grandmother." The ballroom noise dropped away. "She's been dead for 3 years. Yes, and she left instructions that I was to wait. He removed the envelope from inside his jacket. Wait for what? His eyes moved toward the stage. For this. I took the envelope with both hands. What is it? Her final will and related instructions, the operative one, not the document your father has been relying on. I stared at him. My father said everything passed to him. Your father was aware of her 2014 estate plan. He was not aware she revoked it in 2019. My mouth went dry. Samuel lowered his voice. Mrs. Mercer told me to deliver this on the day Conrad publicly disinherited you or allowed the family to do so. She believed that would be the day you stopped doubting what you had seen. Across the room, cameras flashed around Vivienne. I need air, I said. Samuel nodded. There is a service corridor behind you. I'll wait near coat check. I slipped through the service doors with the envelope pressed against my ribs. The hallway was bright, plain, and loud with the clatter of the hotel kitchen. Waiters moved past me carrying trays of champagne for the people applauding my replacement. I found a narrow alcove beside stacked linen carts and broke the wax seal with my thumbnail. The first page was dense legal text. My eyes fought me, as they always did when pressure rose. I breathed the way grandmother had taught me, not Wort by Wort. Structure first, names, dates, assets, conditions. I, Beatrice Lane Mercer, being of sound mind, revoke all prior testamentary instruments and declare this to be my final will. My hands began to tremble. To my granddaughter Lydia Rose Mercer, I bequeath 52% of my ownership shares in Mercer Lane Holdings, including all founder voting rights attached thereto. 52%. Control. Not a gift certificate. Not a necklace. Not a polite trust that paid out a little money so no one had to feel guilty. Control of the company. I read on. This bequest is made with full knowledge of the way my son Conrad and his wife Helena have treated Lydia. She has been described as slow, burdensome, and unsuitable for leadership. Those descriptions are false. Lydia has been denied instruction, access, and respect. She has not failed. She has been failed. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Grandmother had seen. She had seen the jokes, the seating charts, the lowered expectations, the way my parents made every closed door look like mercy. The will continued. Condition. Within 72 hours of receipt, Lydia must formally request an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors of Mercer Lane Holdings. Failure to act within that period will render this bequest inactive, and the 2014 estate plan shall control. 72 hours. My grandmother had left me a door that would lock again if I stood outside it too long. I folded the will carefully and walked back toward coat check, where Samuel Greer waited with his hands clasped behind his back. You read the condition, he said. Why would she do that? Because she knew you might talk yourself out of taking what was yours. This will destroy my family. His expression did not change. Your family made a public decision tonight. Your grandmother gave you a private remedy. There is a difference. My father will say she was confused. He will. That is why she prepared more than a will. I thought of the walnut box in my closet. Samuel saw my face. You have it. The box? Open it tonight. The ballroom doors opened behind us, releasing applause and music. I looked through the gap and saw Vivienne posing with my parents. My mother adjusted my sister's hair for the photo. My father stood behind them both, hand on Vivienne's shoulder, proud and secure. For 29 years I had waited for one of them to turn around. They did not. Tomorrow morning, I told Samuel, we request the meeting. He gave one small nod. Your grandmother said you would. I left the hotel before dessert. No one stopped me. At my apartment, my roommates were asleep. The kitchen sink was full of mugs. A neighbor's television murmured through the wall. I took the walnut box from the back of my closet and sat cross-legged on my bed. The brass clasp stuck at first. Inside were 3 things. A handwritten letter on grandmother's blue stationery. A yellowed operating agreement dated May 3, 1971. A silver flash drive. I opened the letter. My dearest Lydia, if you are reading this, Samuel has done what I asked, and your father has done what I feared. I am sorry I could not protect you better while I was alive. I tried in the ways I knew, but I stayed too quiet for too long. That is my regret. The company was never meant to become a throne. It was meant to be a stewardship. Your father never understood the difference. The enclosed operating agreement proves that founder shares carry permanent voting rights unless the board approves a change by supermajority. Conrad does not know I kept the original. He prefers copies that support his memory. The flash drive contains minutes and audio from the February 2018 board meeting, when Conrad attempted to reduce my voting rights from 52% to 12%. He argued I was too old to understand the company I built. The motion failed because Margaret Vale and Peter Cho refused to support him. I did not forget that day. I also did not forget the way he spoke about you in the same meeting. He used your dyslexia as proof that my judgment had declined because I continued to believe in you. He was wrong about you. He was wrong about me. Use this for justice, not cruelty. Do not become him. All my love, Grandmother B. I sat on the bed until dawn with the letter in my lap. At 9 the next morning, I called Margaret Vale. She answered on the second ring. Lydia, she said, as if she had been expecting me for years. You know? Beatrice told me enough. I need an emergency board meeting. You need 3 directors to request one. I am one. Samuel said you might help. Samuel is cautious. I will do better than help. Peter Cho will sign. So will Denise Albright if she has finally had enough of your father's temper, and I believe she has. I gripped the phone. Why would they risk it? Margaret's voice sharpened into business. Because Conrad Mercer has mistaken fear for loyalty. They are not the same thing. By dinner, the petition had been filed. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Monday at 10 in the morning, Mercer Lane headquarters, 38th floor. My father found out Sunday afternoon. Vivian called first. What are you doing? She said without hello. Laundry. Do not be cute. I am folding towels. Dad just received notice of an emergency board meeting requested by Margaret Vale, Peter Cho, and Denise Albright. That does not happen unless someone stirred them up. Maybe the board has concerns. Lydia, her voice dropped. If this is about Friday, you need to stop. You are hurt. I understand that. But humiliating yourself in front of the board will not make you equal. Equal. She said it like a door I had tried to break into. I'm not asking you for anything, Vivian. Good, because I can't protect you from Dad if you walk into that room. That almost made me laugh. You never protected me from Dad. She went silent. Then she hung up. 20 minutes later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was controlled, which meant furious. Lydia, whatever confusion you are involved in, it ends now. You will come to my office at 8 tomorrow morning before the meeting, and we will discuss how to handle this privately. Do not force me to correct you in public. I saved the voicemail. Then I printed 3 copies of the will, the operating agreement, and the 2018 minutes. I loaded the audio onto my phone and a backup drive. I wrote a statement in large font, double-spaced with color-coded tabs. Not because I was weak, because I knew how my brain worked. Monday morning, I borrowed a black blazer from my roommate Nora. It was too long in the sleeves, but clean. I carried a second-hand leather portfolio that still smelled faintly of someone else's cigarettes. The lobby guard at Mercer Lane looked surprised to see me going to the executive elevators. File room's 26, he said. Boardroom is 38. He blinked. Before he could answer, Margaret Vale's voice came from behind him. She's with me. Margaret was 74, small, silver-haired, and more intimidating than my father on his best day. She had built retail centers with my grandmother in the 70s, when men in banks still asked whether their husbands approved. She wore a red coat and no smile. Ready? She asked. No. Good. Overconfidence ruins more meetings than fear. The boardroom had a long walnut table and floor-to-ceiling windows facing the harbor. Portraits of past leaders lined the wall. My grandmother's portrait hung near the far end, not above the head chair where it belonged, but near a credenza, slightly shadowed. My father sat at the head of the table. Vivian sat beside him, though she was not a board member. When I walked in, my father did not look angry. He looked embarrassed, which was worse for me and more dangerous for him. Lydia, he said, voice smooth. This meeting is not appropriate for employees. Margaret pulled out a chair. It is appropriate for the person named in the documents we requested the meeting to review. Vivian gave me a sad little smile. Lydia, you don't have to do this. I know. Then why are you? I looked at my grandmother's portrait. Because someone finally left me proof. Robert Niles, the board chair, called the meeting to order. He had known my grandmother for decades and had the weary face of a man who had survived too many rich families. This emergency session was requested by Directors Vale, Cho, and Albright, he said. Margaret, you have the floor. Margaret stood. The issue before us concerns ownership and voting control of Mercer Lane Holdings. I yield my time to Lydia Mercer. All eyes turned to me. My father leaned back, folding his hands. Before Lydia begins, he said, I need to provide context. Robert frowned. Briefly, my younger daughter has struggled with certain cognitive limitations her entire life. We have supported her as best we can. She is emotional after Friday's announcement, and may have been influenced by individuals who do not understand our family. Vivian lowered her eyes and practiced sympathy. My father continued, she is a records clerk. She has no legal background, no leadership experience, and difficulty reading complex material. I say this with love, but the board should understand her limitations before this becomes a spectacle. The old shame rose in my throat. Then I heard grandmother's voice. Side door, I opened my portfolio. I will not be discussing my diagnosis today, I said. I will be discussing legal documents. My father's smile faltered. I held up the will. This is the final will of Beatrice Lane Mercer, executed August 19, 2019, witnessed by independent counsel and held in escrow by Whitcomb and Greer. My father went still. That is impossible. Samuel Greer stood from the chair near the wall. It is not. Robert looked at him. Identify yourself. Samuel Greer, partner at Whitcomb and Greer. I served as Beatrice Mercer's personal attorney from 2006 until her death. I supervised execution of the 2019 will and can attest to its validity. Vivian sat forward. We have a 2014 will. You have a revoked instrument, Samuel said. The later will controls. I slid copies down the table. The relevant provision bequeaths 52% of grandmother's shares in Mercer Lane Holdings to me, including all founder voting rights. The room changed. You can feel power shift before anyone admits it. Shoulders tighten. Pens stop moving. People reread the first page because the first page did not ask their permission to be true. Robert Niles put on his glasses. 52%, he said quietly. My father stood. My mother was ill. She was not ill in 2019, Samuel said. She was declining. I removed the 1971 operating agreement from my folder. She anticipated that argument. My father looked at me then, really looked. For the first time that morning, he seemed to understand. I had not wandered into the room with feelings. I had come with structure. This is the original operating agreement from 1971, I said. It establishes permanent voting rights for founder shares unless changed by board supermajority. Peter Cho, a quiet board member near the window, leaned forward. I have only seen copies. Grandmother kept the original. Vivian's voice sharpened. Even if that is authentic, it does not prove she was competent when she changed her will. No, I said. This does. I pressed play on my phone. My father's voice filled the boardroom from 6 years earlier. Beatrice is 80 years old. She cannot be expected to understand the complexity of modern capital markets. I move that founder voting control be reduced from 52% to 12%. Another voice, Margaret's, colder and younger on the recording. You are asking this board to strip the founder of the company of control because she disagrees with you. My father's recorded voice replied, I am asking this board to protect the company from sentimentality, including her attachment to Lydia. My name landed in the room. The recording continued. The younger girl is not leadership material, my father said. Beatrice's insistence otherwise shows her judgment is compromised. I stopped the audio. No one moved. My father had gone pale. Vivian's face had cracked open with something like shock, not because he had said it, because everyone had heard it. That was a private meeting, my father said. Margaret spoke before I could. It was a board meeting attended by the majority shareholder. Beatrice had every right to record her own protection. Robert set down the will. Mr. Greer, are the originals available for verification? Yes, the will is held in escrow. The operating agreement can be inspected. I have certified copies and chain of custody documentation. Robert looked at my father. Conrad, do you have evidence contradicting any of this? My father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Vivian recovered first. Lydia cannot run Mercer Lane. I have not asked to run Mercer Lane, I said. Then what do you want? The question was not only hers. It belonged to the whole room. I looked at the portrait of my grandmother. For 29 years, people had answered that question for me. They said I wanted attention, special treatment, charity, revenge, proof I was equal to Vivian. I wanted none of those things. I want the board to recognize the valid ownership structure, I said. And then I want this board to evaluate whether Conrad Mercer still has its confidence as chief executive. My father's chair scraped back. You ungrateful little girl. Robert's voice cut through the room. Sit down, Conrad. The shock of that sentence was almost physical. My father sat. Robert turned to me. Are you making a motion? Yes. As majority shareholder, I move for a vote of confidence in Conrad Mercer as CEO. If the board votes confidence, I will not interfere with operations during this transition. If the board votes no confidence, he resigns according to the bylaws. Vivian stared at me. This is revenge. No, I said, this is governance. The kind grandmother wrote into the company so no one person could confuse inheritance with ownership. Margaret lifted her hand. Seconded. The vote happened so quietly that it felt unreal. 4 directors voted confidence, 7 voted no confidence, 1 abstained. Robert counted twice, then removed his glasses. The motion carries. Conrad Mercer has lost the confidence of the board. Under Section 12 of the bylaws, he has 30 days to tender resignation or submit to removal proceedings. My father did not explode. That would have been easier. He looked at me with a kind of blank recognition, as if I had been a door in his house for years and had suddenly opened into a room he never knew existed. You did this, he said. No, I said. Grandmother did. I just came when she called. He walked out without another word. Vivian followed him, but at the door she stopped and looked back at me. For once, she had no polished sentence ready. The board recessed for counsel to verify everything formally. Samuel stayed with the documents. Margaret touched my shoulder as she passed. Beatrice would have liked your motion, she said. I almost fired him. No, you didn't. I looked at her. She smiled faintly. You are too much like her. In the private hallway outside the boardroom, my parents were waiting. My mother must have been called during the meeting. Her face was streaked with tears, but even then she looked expensive. Silk blouse, diamond studs, handbag clutched like a shield. Lydia, she said. My father stepped toward me. Do you understand what you have done? Yes, you have humiliated this family. You did that Friday night. His face darkened. My mother put a hand on his sleeve. Conrad, not here. She stole my company. The sentence hit something in me, but it did not knock me down. It was never yours alone. Your grandmother was manipulated. By whom? Her lawyer? Margaret? The original operating agreement? Your own recorded words? My mother's voice broke. We were trying to protect you. I looked at her, almost amazed. From what? From expectations you couldn't meet. No, I said. You protected yourselves from being embarrassed by me. You called it kindness because that sounded better. She covered her mouth. Lydia, please. You sat at every table while Dad made me the punchline. You let Vivian be announced as the future while I was hidden behind a column. You knew my job was being eliminated. You knew I had rent to pay. I thought severance would give you time. Time to disappear quietly. My father laughed bitterly. Listen to yourself. One document and suddenly you think you are Beatrice. No, I said. I think I am Lydia. That seems to be the part none of you prepared for. He reached for my arm. I stepped back before he touched me. Do not. His hand hung in the air. For the first time in my life, my father looked uncertain what rules applied. This'll be contested, he said. Samuel expected that. You will lose, then contest it. He had no answer because we both knew what had happened in that room. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. My mother called my name. I did not turn around. The doors closed on their faces, and for the first time all day, my knees nearly gave out. I rode down 38 floors with one hand on the rail and the other around my grandmother's letter. I thought triumph would feel bright. It did not. It felt like grief with oxygen in it. By the time I reached the lobby, Samuel was waiting near security. You did well, he said. I feel sick. That is common when truth has been held too long. Outside, Boston traffic moved as if my life had not just split in half. Buses sighed at curbs. Students crossed with iced coffees. A man in a Red Sox cap shouted into his phone. I stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the Mercer Lane building. It was glass and steel and stone, and for the first time it did not look like my father's face. It looked like my grandmother's work. My father's resignation came 9 days later. He did not wait the full 30 days. Robert Niles emailed the board at 6:12 p.m. with a formal notice. Conrad Mercer would step down as CEO at the end of the month. Robert would serve as interim chief executive while the board began a search. A second email went to all staff the next morning. Mercer Lane Holdings announces a leadership transition. Conrad Mercer will depart after years of service. The board welcomes Lydia Mercer in her capacity as majority shareholder and strategic advisor during the transition. Strategic advisor. I read that phrase at my file room desk. 3 people walked past me without meeting my eyes. By noon, people who had ignored me for 2 years wanted coffee. An acquisitions manager sent, "Would love to hear your thoughts sometime." A senior analyst wrote, "Always knew you had a sharp eye." He had once asked me to refill printer paper while I was eating lunch. I answered none of them. Patricia Sloan came by at 3 with 2 cups of tea. "Your grandmother used to say the room would find you late," she said, handing me one. "What does that mean?" "It means people are slow when looking at quiet women." That was the first time I laughed all week. The business press picked up the story within days. They did not use my name at first, but everyone in Boston real estate knew enough. Mercer Lane Holdings faces leadership shakeup after founder's estate documents surface. Former CEO's succession plan reversed by founder voting shares. Questions raised over governance at family-owned development firm. My parents withdrew from 2 charity events. My mother stopped posting photographs from luncheons. Invitations slowed. People who had praised my father's steady leadership suddenly remembered concerns they had apparently held for years. I did not enjoy it. I also did not protect them from it. That distinction mattered. 6 weeks after the board meeting, my mother asked to see me. She suggested our family house. I said no. We met at a small cafe near the Boston Public Library. Neutral public, no portraits of ancestors watching from walls. She looked smaller without the staging of our home around her. "Thank you for coming," she said. "What do you want?" She flinched. "To apologize. I waited. I failed you," she said, and the words seemed to scrape on the way out. I told myself we were being realistic. I told myself Vivienne needed more because she could carry more. I told myself you were safer with less pressure, but that was not the truth. What was the truth? She looked down at her coffee. I was ashamed, not of you exactly, of not knowing how to help you, of having a child who made me feel inadequate, and instead of admitting that, I let your father decide you were the problem. That answer hurt because it was more honest than I expected. You watched him humiliate me. Yes. You joined him. Her eyes filled. Yes. Are you sorry because you lost standing or because you hurt me? She closed her eyes. Both, she whispered. I hate that both is true, but it is. For a long time I said nothing. I had imagined this apology for years. In my imagination, it fixed something instantly. In real life, it sat between us like a fragile cup neither of us knew how to hold. I can't give you the daughter who kept pretending nothing happened, I said. I know. I might be willing to know you differently, slowly, if you can be honest. She nodded, crying silently. I can try. Trying is not the same as repairing. I know that too. It was not forgiveness. It was a door left unlocked, not open. Vivienne called in August. I almost let it ring out. Can we meet? She asked. No lawyers, no parents. We sat on a bench near the Charles River, watching sailboats tilt in the afternoon wind. Vivienne wore jeans and a white shirt, no armor, no pearls, no courtroom face. I've been in therapy, she said. Okay. That sounds like something people say when they want credit. Do you? She smiled weakly. Maybe. I'm trying not to. I waited. I was angry at you, she said, after the board meeting. I thought you had taken what was mine. It was never yours. I know that now, or I'm learning it. She twisted her hands together. Dad built my whole life around being chosen. Every grade, every award, every internship. If I slowed down, he looked through me. I saw what happened to you, and I thought that was the alternative. So you let it happen? Yes. No excuse, no softening. Just yes, that mattered. When he made jokes, I laughed because if I didn't, he might look at me the way he looked at you, she said. That is cowardly, I know. The river flashed silver under the sun. I needed a sister, I said, her face crumpled. I know. You were in the room. I know. I don't know what we can be now. Neither do I, she wiped her cheek. But I would like to start with the truth, if you are willing. We sat there for an hour. We did not hug. We did not repair 20 years by the water. But for the first time, Vivienne asked me what reading felt like. She listened without correcting, explaining, or turning it into a lesson about herself. That was new enough. By November, I had moved into my own apartment in Jamaica Plain. One bedroom, old floors, morning light, a kitchen barely large enough for two people, and perfect for one. I hung grandmother's portrait above my desk, not the formal one from the boardroom, but a photograph Patricia found of her in 1974 standing in a hard hat in front of a half-renovated warehouse, grinning like the world had just underestimated the wrong woman. I accepted a formal role at Mercer Lane as Director of Community Redevelopment. The title was mine. The salary was $190,000, plus dividends I still sometimes could not believe were real. My work focused on renovating neglected properties without forcing out the small tenants my grandmother had cared about. Energy upgrades, long-term lease protections, mixed-use projects that did not treat neighborhoods like spreadsheets with sidewalks. I still read slowly. I still use audio software, color overlays, diagrams, and assistants who know that sending me a 40-page document at midnight is not strategy, it is laziness. The difference is that no one calls those tools excuses anymore. My father calls once a month. The conversations are short. Weather, interest rates. A building permit he pretends not to care about. He has not apologized in a way that satisfies me. Once he said, "Your grandmother was right about your eye for structures." It was the closest he has come. I did not thank him for noticing 20 years late. My mother and I have lunch every few weeks. Sometimes it is awkward. Sometimes she slips and speaks to me in the old careful voice, as if I might break or embarrass her. Then she catches herself and starts again. I respect the starting again more than the apology. Vivian and I are not best friends. We are something more honest than that. We meet for coffee. She tells me when therapy is ugly. I tell her when board meetings still make my hands sweat. She left the path my father had drawn for her and joined a public interest legal clinic part-time while keeping private work to pay her bills. My father calls that wasteful. Vivian no longer asks him to understand. Mercer Lane did not collapse without Conrad Mercer at the head of the table. That was perhaps the quietest justice of all. The company stabilized, investors stayed, tenants renewed. Robert Niles served as interim CEO until the board hired Amara Singh, a woman who had spent 25 years turning distressed properties into functioning neighborhoods. She did not have the Mercer name. That was one of the reasons I voted for her. At her first board meeting, she asked me to present the redevelopment map for 3 aging medical buildings in Dorchester. I stood at the front of the room with color-coded slides, audio notes in one ear, and my grandmother's old red pencil in my hand. No one laughed. No one looked toward my father to decide whether I belonged. When I finished, Amara said, "This is the clearest risk map I've seen on this portfolio." The sentence was ordinary business praise. It still almost undid me. After the meeting, Margaret Vale leaned close and said, "Side door worked." I smiled. It always did. There was one more legal fight, because my father could not resist leaving claw marks on the door as it closed. In December, his attorney sent a letter challenging the 2019 will on the grounds of undue influence. The phrase looked absurd on the page. Undue influence by whom? A dead woman who had outworked every man in her industry for 50 years? A granddaughter who had not even known what was in the envelope until a ballroom full of strangers heard her father hand the future to someone else? Samuel Greer called me after forwarding the letter. "This is pressure," he said, "not a strong claim. Do I have to go to court?" "Possibly for a hearing, but your grandmother prepared for this. She had." 2 weeks later, Samuel sent my father's lawyer copies of medical evaluations from 2019, confirming grandmother's competency, sworn statements from her physician, notes from the notaries, and a video file I had not known existed. In the video, grandmother sat in Samuel's conference room wearing a navy jacket and pearl earrings, her posture straight despite the cane beside her chair. Samuel asked on camera, "Mrs. Mercer, are you signing this document freely?" "I am." "Has anyone pressured you to make these changes?" Grandmother's eyes flashed. "If anyone could pressure me, Mr. Greer, I would have had a much easier life." Even Samuel smiled in the video. Then she looked directly into the camera. "I am leaving control to Lydia because she understands stewardship. Conrad understands possession. Those are not the same." I watched that line 6 times alone in my apartment, not because I needed proof, because some part of me still needed permission to believe I had not imagined her faith in me. My father withdrew the challenge before the hearing. He sent no apology with the withdrawal, only a brief statement through counsel acknowledging that the estate documents were valid and that he would not pursue further claims. It was bloodless, legal, and probably humiliating for him. I accepted it for what it was, not remorse. Surrender. The strangest consequence of becoming majority shareholder was how quickly people rewrote themselves around me. At the holiday staff reception, the same executives who had once stepped around my file boxes now asked for my opinion on capital allocation. People laughed too hard at my quiet comments. They repeated my phrases in meetings as if I had issued policy instead of asked a question. My inbox filled with invitations to panels, lunches, advisory groups, and charity committees. For a few weeks, I hated all of it. Then Amara Singh gave me the bluntest advice I received that year. "Do not confuse their opportunism with your obligation," she said, after watching 3 senior managers circle me near the coffee station. "Listen when there is value, decline when there is performance. You do not need to become available just because they finally learned your name." That became another boundary. I started holding office hours twice a month for employees below director level. No executives allowed. The first session had 4 people: a leasing assistant, a junior analyst, a receptionist, and a maintenance coordinator who joined by video from one of our properties because he said no one had ever asked him what tenants complained about before complaints turned legal. By the 3rd session, the room was full. I heard about software that made service tickets disappear, a property manager who mocked immigrant tenants, a disabled tenant whose ramp request had been delayed for 8 months because the cost was not urgent, and a cleaning contractor whose staff were being underpaid by a subcontractor hiding behind a name 1 letter different from the approved vendor. Old Lydia would have taken notes, felt sick, and wondered whether she was overreacting. New Lydia asked for documentation. Within 2 months, Amara and I changed the service ticket system, reopened the ramp request, terminated the subcontractor, and created a tenant response audit that reported directly to the board. It was not glamorous. No newspaper wrote about it. My father would have called it operational clutter. Grandmother would have called it the company. One afternoon, Patricia Sloan stopped by my office with a cardboard archive box. "Found these in storage," she said. Inside were photographs of grandmother on job sites. Grandmother in a hard hat. Grandmother arguing with a city inspector. Grandmother holding a baby I realized was me, standing in front of a building I now knew we still owned. At the bottom was a note in her handwriting: "Lydia notices thresholds." That was all. I did not know when she wrote it or why she kept it, but I pinned it above my desk. Thresholds became the way I understood my life. There was the threshold of the ballroom, where I walked in, still hoping not to be seen, and walked out holding the truth. The threshold of the boardroom, where my father expected me to shrink and instead had to hear his own voice played back to him. The threshold of my new apartment, where no one else's disappointment followed me unless I invited it inside. The hardest threshold was with myself. For months after the board vote, I still heard my father's voice when I opened a long document. She can barely read a spreadsheet. I heard Vivian's voice too, softer but not kinder. Some limitations cannot be overcome with effort alone. Shame is efficient that way. It memorizes other people's sentences and repeats them when the room is empty. So I built new sentences. I read slowly and I understand deeply. I need tools, and tools are not weakness. I was not hidden because I lacked value. I was hidden because my value threatened the story. At first, I wrote those sentences on sticky notes. Then I stopped needing to see them every day. Not because doubt vanished, because my life began producing evidence. The clearest evidence came from a tenant named Mrs. Alvarez, who ran a small physical therapy clinic in one of the Dorchester buildings. My father had planned to replace her clinic with a national chain once the lease expired. The chain offered more rent, the spreadsheet looked cleaner. The neighborhood would have lost the only clinic within walking distance that accepted several public insurance plans. I visited Mrs. Alvarez on a rainy Thursday. She showed me the treatment rooms, the old elevator, the leaky back window, the folder of unanswered maintenance requests. Then she looked me straight in the face and said, "Your company owns this building, but my patients carry it." That sentence changed the redevelopment plan. We kept her clinic, repaired the building, and structured the national tenant into a different property, where displacement was not the hidden cost of profit. The final return was lower in year 1 and stronger by year 5 because vacancy dropped and local medical tenants renewed early. At the next board meeting, a director asked how I had seen the risk. I almost gave a complicated answer about tenant stability, community anchoring, and long-term cash flow. Instead, I said, I listened to the person closest to the problem. Margaret smiled from the other side of the table. That, more than the inheritance, felt like becoming my grandmother's granddaughter. Looking back, I understand something I could not have understood at 16 or 22, or even on the night of Vivian's celebration. My grandmother did not leave me control because I was better than my sister. She left it because she knew I understood what it felt like to be treated as inconvenient by people with power. She knew I would notice who got pushed to the back table, whose name was misspelled on the place card, whose work was called support until someone important needed it. Dyslexia was never the hole in my mind my parents imagined. It shaped my patience. It made me build systems. It taught me to listen for patterns because pages did not always behave. It gave me the side door. My father judged worth by polish, speed, schools, and applause. My grandmother judged worth by attention, courage, and how people behaved when no one could force them to be kind. For years, I begged my family to see me. The real inheritance was learning I did not need their sight to exist. The envelope from that ballroom is framed in my apartment now, not because of the money, not because of the shares, but because of the sentence Samuel Greer carried across that room like a match. Lydia has spent her life being told she is slow. Now let them learn how fast the truth can move. The truth moved fast that night. But healing is slower. I am learning to respect both.